So on behalf of the Regional Education Lab West, or REL West, we want to thank you for joining our third webinar hosted by our alliance, which is called the California Rural Partnerships Alliance. During this webinar, we welcome Tessa Carmen DeRoy, who will help us explore the ways that we can use data from the California College Guidance Initiative effort for our career pathways work. Valerie and Needy will also summarize some of the key insights that we've learned over this last year with our work through the California Rural Partnerships Alliance. So many of you joined us for our first two webinars, but for the others, I'll quickly review our project structure and staff. Our team for this project includes staff from West Ed and Jobs for the Future. From West Ed, we have Lori Van Houten, Ryan Holbrook, and I think that's, and me, Mary Waller, and I think that's it. Maybe Laura Buckner's here today. And I'm the lead for the Alliance. And from our partners at Job for the Future, today we have Valerie Lundy-Wagner and Needy Sen. For those who are not familiar with the Regional Education Lab or the REL program, it's a federally funded program through a division of the Department of Education called the Institute for Education Sciences. There are 10 labs across the country, and you can see that they're color-coded on the map on your screen. And our labs share the mission. We work with specific states and different states, but we all share the mission of supporting a more evidence-based education system by working in partnership to conduct applied research and coaching. So West Ed has had the REL West contract for the duration of the lab system, which has now been going on for more than 50 years, I think 51 years. And our West region includes the states of Arizona, California, Nevada, and Utah. The Alliance, the California Rural Partners Alliance, obviously focuses on California. Okay, next slide, please. Great, so each REL, so each regional lab is comprised of a number of different alliances. And the alliance that conducts this work, as I've mentioned previously, is called the California Rural Partnerships Alliance. And it was developed to support and strengthen the ability of rural and rural serving partnerships to gather, share, and use data. And the structure of our alliance is that we have technical assistance and coaching to all of the CCPTs in California, and we're working really closely with four different partnerships. Kelseyville, Kern, San Luis Obispo, and Tulare. And those four partnerships comprise a small learning community. And next slide, please. And now I'm going to hand this over to Tessa Carmen DeRoy. And thank you so much for being with us today.
Absolutely, thanks for having me. Ryan, if you could advance the slide, I'll get started. So I'm the Executive Director of the California College Guidance Initiative, and we are a statewide equity-focused nonprofit initiative. We're housed within the Foundation for California Community Colleges, but that's a little bit deceptive in the sense that we are completely intersegmental. So unfortunately, the state doesn't have a lot of intersegmental entities or places to house things that work across the segments. So we are housed within the Foundation on behalf of all of the segments. And what we do is provide a platform that many of you, counselors anyway, might be familiar with, called californiacolleges.edu. And we use that as both a data and planning infrastructure for college and career planning and transition for students as they're moving through 6th through 12th grade and then on into post-secondary education. Next slide, please. I should say that there are two use scenarios for California colleges. Historically, up until about 2011, 2012, so 2013. Up until 2013, it was only an open access site. So it was an informational site. It's open to anyone. It's still open to anyone. It has far more sort of interactive planning tools, educator-facing tools for reporting purposes and for student account management. But it is now, there's also a partnership model that requires data sharing agreements, and there's some fees associated with it because the state doesn't support that part of it. And we use that as a way to do the data side of the work that I'll discuss as we move through the next several minutes. So as you see on your screen, we have two overarching objectives to our work. And the first objective, when we say that we have that students graduate with clear post-secondary goals and a plan for how to achieve them, what do we mean? We essentially mean that students have some sense of their direction that they'd like to take in their careers, not necessarily a specific career, but at least a career cluster, some area of interest, some sense of what it is they might want to pursue, that's actually the driving force for them in figuring out college fit. So whether it's a certificate or an AA or a bachelor's degree or requires a professional or advanced degree, that they're clear about where the points of entry are into that field, that they have a sense of what institutions in the state of California and beyond as pertinent for a smaller number of kids, that they actually have a sense of where they would look for those kinds of opportunities, and that they are clear about how to pay for college and how to sort of transition successfully and build a network and do all the things that they need to do to qualify for the best positioning as they enter post-secondary education. And then for the second objective, it's very much, we think of it a lot like medical records. So you want to make sure that data is following the student in real time to advance decision making. So we're not really designed for research purposes, but what I say about that all the time is that you can build a system where data follows students to support real-time decision making, and you can always aggregate up unitary level data. You can't do it the other way around. So for us, we wanted to focus on the part of the equation that impacts the students immediately in real time, and then to the extent that people want to use that data for other purposes, that's certainly within reason and potentially very beneficial for folks. If we could advance the slide. So again, we manage California colleges. The history of California colleges is kind of interesting. It was established in 1998 through an intersegmental budget proposal, which means that the CSU, the community colleges, the UCs, and the Department of Education got together and said, students need a common front door, was the budget language, some place to start this process of college exploration. And interestingly, even in 1998, the budget language specified that they needed an electronic transcript platform that would help move data from segment to segment. So 2 decades later, here we are, and we in 2013 took over the line item for California colleges and basically converted it from this informational common front door stance to more of an interactive planning tool. And again, this infrastructure for moving data. So California colleges is actually the platform through which the data moves. And we'll talk in a bit about sort of how we match records and make sure that the data is reliably moving within the right ways with the right kids. In order to support utilization, I mean, any tool, you can make a tool that's flawless, which California colleges is not, but you can make a tool that's flawless, and still adoption of technological tools takes a lot of energy. It takes time to help people change the way that they're utilizing tools in classrooms and in counseling interventions. And so we spend a lot of time, and about half of our org chart is dedicated to people working in the field day to day with educators in schools, both at the level of sort of district-wide planning and site-level planning and support for utilization of the tools within K-12. And then for higher ed users, we have relatively newer efforts to get the outreach staff and the high school partnership staff and the folks within higher ed who are directly impacting and working with high school students to utilize the tools in a similar way so that they also can sort of unify the efforts of adults across systems in support of any individual student. If I could get the next slide, please. So this is really the crux of, I mean, there are a lot of college planning platforms out there and career planning platforms out there. I should say that there's a 6th through 12th grade curriculum embedded in California colleges that we hope provides a nice baseline for ensuring that students have sort of what we would consider minimum viable product for helping support a student make informed decisions as they're moving through this very complicated process. But the data side is really what distinguishes us in terms of the college planning space. And so we started the work with an emphasis on, those of us who started the work all came out of college access work with first-generation students and were dismayed by the lack of visibility into progress towards A through G, because it was the only clear standard that the state was using around eligibility for admission, right? So we figured, well, there has to be a way for us to make sure that students actually know whether or not the courses they're taking are aligned with their objectives. And also, and equally important, tools to help educators be able to increase A through G completion, not because we think all students should end up in a direct to four-year pathway, but because we want students to have the opportunity to make those decisions for themselves, and because we think that oftentimes those are rigorous courses that will prepare them better for whatever post-secondary work they're taking on, right? So the goal was to help increase completion rates in the state. So that was our potential kind of value add to K-12 that's hard to find in other platforms. We figured out that by doing that, that analysis of basically taking a student's transcript, automating the process of assessing eligibility for each of the four-year public higher ed systems in the state, that we could send that same data through to CSU campuses, and it would automate a lot of the review that they do on those campuses. So historically, as you're probably aware, if a student applies to 5 different CSU campuses, their transcript is being reviewed at 5 different campuses in largely the same way, not exactly the same way. We figured out that the same eligibility algorithms that we were applying, basically taking students' K-12 transcripts, applying the validations that are relevant to the decision-making around CSU eligibility, and matching all of that data against the course management portal at the University of California, was essentially automating that admissions process. And so CSU said, wow, that would be amazing if you could do that. And so they decided to partner with us and started by saying that they would consider the data coming from our system as pre-verified for the purposes of admission. More recently, as they've eliminated the ELM and the EPT, they are now reliant on K-12 course data and grades to inform placement decisions. And so the data now has 2 different potential uses in the CSU system. We then found that at the California Student Aid Commission, and it looks like that box got slightly cut off, but an instance of sort of really good policy with a somewhat difficult implementation. Now that all K-12 school districts are required to upload Cal Grant verification for every student. So the California Student Aid Commission, we learned, was having difficulty matching, though school districts are required to upload data for all graduating seniors, because the FAFSA submission utilizes a social security number or an ITIN, and because Cal Grant GPA verification utilizes the unique identifier in K-12, the SSID, it's not always easy. For about 25% of the graduating seniors in the state, CSAC has a difficult time matching that data. And that has real-time, again, I should say, equity implications for students. So the rate at which, the speed with which they can get their eligibility determination is really important. Additionally, I should say, go back and say that with the CSU, we find that more usable, actionable data for admissions also helps to smooth the financial aid process in that system. So really with an emphasis on trying to smooth these processes for students, we decided to build these data sharing agreements and technological articulations with each of the systems. And then more recently, the community colleges came on board. As many of you are probably aware, multiple measures placement is now mandatory across all California community colleges, which means that they've got to be able to access K-12 transcript data to support first-year academic placement decisions in order to try and not put too many students into remedial coursework. So again, we've now got another additional legal and technological articulation with them. And then the little clock in the upper right-hand corner is important. So as many of you who work with data know, it's quite difficult to move data in a timely fashion across systems. So oftentimes when we're trying to access data, it's a year to 18 months old by the time it gets into our hands. And obviously for decision making about admissions and financial aid and placement, that's not really all that useful. So because the life of a student changes very quickly, we strongly encourage all of our partner districts to upload data, generally speaking, every 2 weeks to once a month. And it really is driven by the guidance and counseling needs within the district. So the data that's on our system is being used. It needs to look very similar, if not identical, to what's on their student information system in K-12. And especially in the beginning of the term and the end of the term, as things are shifting quickly, it's really important that we keep fresh data on the platform so that it can be used for the guidance purposes. And that benefits all systems, because if K-12 is uploading frequently, then the data that we're moving to the higher ed systems and financial aid providers is very fresh data. We could move on to the next slide. So these are some of the districts that we're partnered with across the state. We have been historically just sort of on an organic growth curve, districts that approached us with an interest in utilizing the data-informed tools. And if we go to the next slide, it gives you sort of the visual representation of where that is across the state. The blue counties are the places where we've had the longest standing presence. We expanded, or we are expanding into only a couple of new counties this year, coming school year. But there is an orchestrated effort in the Central Valley where the two system offices, the CSU and the community colleges, are jointly working to try and make this a uniform infrastructure for the whole Central Valley, 10 counties, in order to provide a proof point for what it would look like if the state of California had one unified system to support these functions for all students and educators across the state. We could go to the next slide. So important to recognize is that the way that data moves from our system to the higher ed systems is through the application process. And what that means is it allows us to make a hard match at the point of application between the unique identifiers in each of the two systems. So if I'm a K-12 student applying to the community colleges, then we're exchanging at the moment that a student launches their application, their student statewide student identifier, and their CCC identifier. There's really not another way to do that with a hard match. Oftentimes, again, data people on the call will know there's the fuzzy match process, which is, is what it is. It's useful where we don't have a hard match. The downside of doing it in the way that we do it is that it requires a change in practice. So it means that educators across the state and students across the state have to be aware of the benefits of launching from within their accounts on California colleges, and have to be willing to make that adjustment in their practices. And so we spend a lot of time promoting and supporting utilization. It's a fairly straightforward, like one-click process, basically, but it is still something that takes time for folks to learn about. And when a student launches their application to the community colleges from within California colleges, a few different things happen. One is that the system automatically logs a verified submission, and they can see that, and then educators can see that for individual students or at the aggregate level for their site, their caseload. Just depends on what kind of educator you are and your purview. And then we're able, not currently to push data centrally to the CCCs because there isn't a repository to receive that data on their end, but we are working with individual colleges at that point, and they can say to us, okay, here for all of these ID numbers, send us transcript data to use for placement. So that supports multiple measures. We are also in design phases of being able to push that data centrally as part of the application process itself, as well as pushing some of the career and educational planning data and a couple of key flags that we think will help students. So foster youth at status, which is an optional field and only about half of the districts provide to us. But when they do, the colleges can proactively identify students who might not self-declare and make sure that they're aware of the services that they are entitled to and could help them to succeed. And then similarly, we do not keep any documentation status on our platform. We never touch it. We have no idea of students' documentation status. But because the rules for eligibility around AB 540 are based on completing 3 years of high school and graduating from an institution in a California high school, we can generate a flag about eligibility for those benefits for every student on our system and push it through so that if a student self-declares as AB 540 eligible, they don't have to go back and get the documentation to support that. So that's the CCC apply articulation. And again, it's sort of current state and future state because the Chancellor's Office has recently started working to align their tools much more closely with ours. Next slide, please. Similarly with Cal State Apply, students can launch Cal State Apply from within their account on California colleges. And it will, because they do have a place to receive the academic transcript data, the students can click a button to migrate over their coursework. And it connects directly to the eligibility tools that I was describing earlier that help students understand whether or not their coursework in fact makes them eligible for baseline admission standards. The coursework pushes through to CSU with very specific flags that say at the course level, this course has been verified against doorways, this course is an area, appropriate subject area, and it'll push into the relevant portions of the application. That was on hold last year because of the rollout of Cal State Apply. It was something that was live on CSU Mentor, their previous platform, for 3 years. And then in the transition to the new platform got put on hold, but it will be live again in October. And then in the future, the Chancellor's Office is trying to determine how best to utilize the college and career planning data that's available on the platform to support transition from a guidance perspective, from a major selective perspective, career planning work within the CSU campuses. If we could advance the slide. And then finally, students can launch their FAFSA. So basically there are 5 relevant applications as we see it, right? There's the community college application, the CSU, the UC, financial aid applications, which is essentially from a student perspective, basically FAFSA. And then, unless they're eligible for some special subpopulation. And then the common application for students who are interested in applying to independent schools. Currently, students can launch 3 of those applications from within California colleges, the 3rd being their FAFSA. So students can launch, same thing, it'll capture that information as part of a report for educators. We actually just finalized an expanded legal agreement with CSAC where we will now be able to confirm submission of FAFSA as well as submission of a Cal Grant GPA verification so that that information all resides and is transparent for students on their account. And then we are in conversation with both UC and the Common App, but we have prioritized the broadest access points first because our equity focus would suggest that we want to serve the greatest number of students in the state who need this support. So started there and we'll keep moving forward as we continue the work. Excuse me, advance the slide, please.
Thank you, Tessa. I believe at this point we're turning it over for a few moments to Needy Sen and Valerie Lundy-Wagner with JFF to continue on.
Great. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Cool. So thank you, Tessa, for giving us that overview of CCGI. Apologies that I couldn't jump in to introduce you, but let me first make a connection between sort of the CRP Alliance and why we thought it would be helpful to bring Tessa and her partner Hannah on from CCGI. In November, we did a webinar where we were highlighting CalPass Plus, Launch Board, and the Centers of Excellence for Labor Market Data. Those are 3, data systems, portals, or dashboards that we know are available for folks who are trying to do data work that's cross-sector in their regions related to CCPT. Now, in all of the work we've been doing, the coaching and technical assistance webinars, I want to make sure we emphasize that none of these data systems or portals that we've introduced are a silver bullet. Our goal is really to make sure people are aware of the different types of systems, the different type of data that could be within them, and how that connects to regional cross-sector sort of career pathways work. So the slide you see right now is really us trying to show you in real time, now that you've seen or heard the description of CCGI, where do the college and career readiness indicators fall in? And we want to stress to you that CCGI maps to many, though not all, of the state level college and career indicators. And then for those of you who have sort of locally defined college and career readiness indicators, we're going to give an example of sort of where that maps onto CCGI and where it doesn't. Can you go to the next slide, please, Brianne? So this first slide is really just a snapshot that comes from the California School dashboard. And you'll see sort of toward the middle of the page where we have prepared in parentheses. So this is one of the, this is a set of indicators that fall under the state level college and career readiness indicators for like a level of prepared. And so you see we have noted, I think, 5 or 6 different indicators on the left. And on the right, you can see what is and isn't included in CCGI. And I think one thing we've learned over the past year and a half or so through this work is that, different districts and different schools are collecting data differently. And so that said, you can see in many ways, as you are collecting and keeping track of your data at the district level, for those of you who are here representing K-12, if you are uploading information through Smarter Balance, for example, and you want to include that in your CCGI sort of portal, then they can include that. You'll see the one thing that definitively is noted that Tessa did mention earlier, if you go down to the 4th or 5th line, is the UC and CSU A through G requirements, which again, it seems a lot of people are paying attention to. And again, that's already going to be included if your district signs on to participate in CCGI. So let's go to the next slide. And I'll say you could do this at the state level for all of the different sort of set of metrics for college and career readiness indicators. We just wanted to give you a snapshot of one. The second slide, though, is really around some locally defined college and career readiness indicators that one of our partner sites has adopted. And what you can see, there are sort of 3 sets of data. So one, college ready, career ready, and then college and career ready. And you can see on the right, we have sort of notated, again, where are these locally defined college and career readiness indicators sort of going to be available if they were to adopt or use CCGI. And you can see with the first 2 related to sort of college coursework, that's not included in CCGI, but again, A through G, which they've decided is important to them, can be. In terms of dual enrollment, students with a CTE course, you see again, we have sort of, if you at the district level are collecting that information or your district partners are collecting it, it can be included in CCGI. The one that I'll also call your attention to is about 3rd from the bottom, students in a work-based learning internship. So, we know work-based learning is on lots of folks' minds as they develop and create their career pathways. If that's something that you want to include, there's a way to get that sort of added to the CCGI platform as well. So I'm hoping that this is helpful for people to see, not just for CCGI specifically, but with all of the different data systems and portals and dashboards that you have available to you. I think it's important to think about how you're able to map the indicators that are most meaningful to you at the regional level to the different data systems that are actually available to you. And again, I want to stress, there is no silver bullet. We haven't necessarily found the one system that will capture everything you need, but we do think that with some prioritizing and just some strategy work, you can identify the systems that will work best for you currently. And I think, as Tessa noted, in the future, many of these systems are evolving. So can we go to the next slide, please? So before I sort of turn this back over to Tessa, I want to say, for those of you who've been with us thinking about regional cross-sector pathways data work, we want to really point out that there are some advantages and caveats to both what Tessa has presented. Right, the fact that students and really their families provide consent for the data sharing upon application is key. I think a lot of the data challenges folks have come across has been with the matching, that there is a hard data match between the SSID and the, right here we have the CCCID, but I think, the post-secondary ID numbers is important. There are substantially shorter lag times with this system once it's up and running compared to some of the others that are available. Now that said, CCGI was not specifically built for regional cross-sector data work. It was really built to support students and educators, right? So we want to make sure people keep that in mind. Onboarding, I think as Tessa mentioned, time matters. It does take around 6 to 9 months, for onboarding. I think as I mentioned earlier, dual enrollment and course articulations are not flagged in this system. And then the CSU breadth and IGEST course data are not captured. And then last but not least, I think Tessa mentioned when she showed the slide with the state, CCGI is working in a number of regions within the state. They may not be able to get to everyone right now, but I still thought it was important for you all to learn a little bit about CCGI, understand where it can map to the way you're collecting now or may collect in the future, data related to state level college and career readiness indicators or locally defined college and career readiness indicators. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Tessa for a minute to tell you a little bit about CCGI data and CalPAS Plus data, because we think this is an important point to leave you with. Can we go to the next slide, please?
If you're familiar with CalPAS Plus, and we are complementary and different with this sort of overlap around this issue of multiple measures. So CalPAS and us recently sat down to try and figure out, since everybody always asks how best to talk about our similarities and differences. So again, just to sort of recap, our work is really focused at the student level transcript data and is used for real-time decision-making, right? So applications for admission, for financial aid, guidance, advising, placement, those are the areas that really are where we focus our work. And the data is uploaded quite frequently because it's a specific file for us. It's not just during the CalPAD reporting periods. And then again, we have these sort of system level articulations that allow us to move data from place to place. There are we're able right now to move data from K-12 into higher ed. There's a little bit more complexity to moving data back from higher ed into K-12. So I'm happy to talk or answer questions about that. The one place where the data overlaps, as you saw in my sort of earlier slide with the various segments and how we share data, it makes a lot of sense for us to move data to the community colleges because we figure capture data once from K-12 and use it as many times as we can to smooth student pathways across the segments. So placement feels very much in line with what we do. But historically, placement has really been something that CalPAS has been working on. And we are in the process of sort of passing that baton in certain parts of the state where there's going to be enough density of data within a region that is on our system. So the Chancellor's Office has recently, the Community College Chancellor's Office has recently come up with sort of a hierarchy of best available data for students for multiple measures. And their top choice is CCGI, pretty much because of the fact that we can move data more quickly so that people can use 12th grade data for mathematics placement, in which it's particularly important to have the full 4-year course record. CalPAS's efforts have always been, other than placement, very much at the aggregate level and looking at sort of program evaluation and analysis and predictive analytics, more practitioner facing than, certainly not student facing. Ours is really student facing and practitioner facing for different purposes. And then the data upload timeframes for CalPAS have been pretty much based on the CalPADS reporting period. So it's been, generally speaking, a slower turnaround. So it's going to be a little bit of a complex transition. There's huge value that we can bring to one another, CalPAS and CCGI, if we can work together to benefit students. There's a lot of stuff that they do that we don't do, and vice versa. And so we're looking at, but we've just begun a conversation on sort of how best do we articulate efforts for the maximum benefit for students and educators across the state. So hopefully that's clear, but again, happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Tessa. Oh, thank you, Tessa. We're hoping to open it up for questions.
I was just curious if you have any plans for data swinging back our way for the K-12.
Absolutely hoping to, yeah. So there's a lot of very large, complex conversations happening at the state level right now around all of this. It looks like the first system that might be willing to do that is the CCCs. There's certainly precedent in that system, which makes it easier. So the question right now is about identifiable data back versus de-identified unitary versus aggregate level. And it'll take a little time, I think, to start building out the mechanisms for doing that, the technological mechanisms for doing that. But we certainly understand it to be a very key interest. I would be interested in whether folks have an opinion or a need around, a specific need around identified versus not identified individual student data, because we're sort of building our argument right now and writing up a lot of the legal. Is there something specific, Michael, that you were looking for?
Well, we want to know, we have a number of our students who start junior colleges, start community colleges, but we want to know what happens. We want to see how many of them move on to a 4-year, how many of them get a certificate, how many of them finish a college pathway. In other words, all of our work we've done in K-12 to send them into a college and career environment, we want to know what happens there.
Yep.
And more than just, 12% or 19%, because if we can identify our students, we may see things that we can address to make things even more successful for those students.
That has been my argument. Right at the moment, I can't tell you which way it's going to go, but I've made exactly that argument, that even de-identified is not quite as valuable. But it is a conversation in process, and I will be happy to provide updates to anybody who wants, over time.
Thank you.
Yep.
It looks like we have another question.
The connection to Launchboard. Suzanne, did you want to unmute or do you want me to just respond to that? Right now, the data does not feed directly into Launchboard. We are on the front end of a conversation with CalPAS Plus about how it can. And right now, the emphasis and the priority is on moving data from our system to the CCC Apply application, at which point, once it's in the community college system, it could be used both for placement and then could also be used to populate Launchboard. But there's a few steps to that process. So none of this moves as quickly as we would all like. We all wanted this whole system 2 decades ago.
I think I'm unmuted, so I'll just ask kind of a follow-up. A few years back when I was the K-14 TAP for the Inland Empire Desert region, we did a lot of work to try and get our K-12 partners connected with the new CalPAS Plus, and we did the new they had to do like an MOU, and we went through all that process. But I think what we found in the end was, even if they had signed the the participation agreement, a lot of them still had those huge gaps in data. So they may have data from 2002 to 4, but then there was 6 to 8 was missing, and then what's being done to address that?
Yeah. So you're absolutely right, and that has been the challenge. So when we started this work in 2013, that's what people kept warning us would happen. And my question back to people was, what's the value to K-12? I mean, if you're going to take data from K-12, then what are you giving them back that's actually useful? So they're not just uploading to service the higher ed systems, they're uploading to get something back for themselves and their students. And that's where the eligibility tools that we provide and the sort of ability to do all the college and career planning in a cumulative portfolio, that's all, I think, the value add to the K-12 side. We are looking to continue to build out those tools for K-12 to meet some of the additional needs that folks have asked us for. So again, our sort of design is that if the tools are useful to K-12 and being used in K-12, then the data populating the system will stay fresh, because our staff sits in on lots of conversations between SIS managers and counselors where the counselors are saying, like, that data is not current and that data is wrong. And the counselors know what's going on with the data, so they will push for cleaner, better, more real-time data, because they're using it themselves within their own segment. And that, again, benefits everyone, because it means that there's consistency in uploads. It means that there's not such a heavy lag time in the ability to access the data for other purposes. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. But it's not surefire. I mean, so just to be clear, we don't control we ask, and pretty much all of our districts do upload. I would say, some upload maybe every 5 to 6 weeks, but generally there's not that much lag time. It's generally, some districts upload nightly, some districts are uploading 3 days a week, down to monthly is sort of the baseline that we look for. But absent some sort of completely free and highly incentivized state infrastructure, right, that makes this work in real time, we've just been trying to build something that would meet the needs kind of without that level of institutional force, right? So it's great if you can get buy-in across an entire region to do that, and that's really what the Central Valley pilot is designed to do. So for starting in 18-19 and then through 21-22, we will be available to any district in the Central Valley that has a high school. So we don't do K-8s, but any district in the Central Valley that has a high school, be it a high school district or a unified district. It will be free, meaning no fees associated, but certainly plenty of work to be done to partner with CCGI across the 10 counties of the Central Valley. And the purpose of that, and it's subsidized by the chancellor's offices, and the purposes of that is to really say, like, how many benefits might we reap if we as a state had this kind of an infrastructure, and to be able to use it as a proof point where hopefully we're just getting started, but hopefully all of the colleges kind of share with one voice, this is what we want K-12 to be doing, because it'll help your students as they transition. So there's not an easy answer on that, unfortunately, but we're working it through as best we can.
So just in case anyone else has questions, we have on the slide the partnership at californiacolleges.edu, where our colleagues over here at CCGI can answer any additional questions you might have about their system or availability. If anyone has any more questions, I'll sort of give you another 20, 30 seconds to chat into the chat box, and if not, we'll move on. But I want to make sure you know that they have their email address there, and then also, like we said earlier, at the end of this webinar, we usually try to leave a little time for any additional follow-up questions. If not, Ryan, do you mind advancing to the next slide? Oh, can you go back one slide, please? Thanks. So for those of you who are new, thank you for joining us. For those of you who've been on a couple of our webinars, we appreciate you coming back. Much of this webinar is a recap. The rest of the webinar is going to be a recap of what we've learned in the past year or so when we first started this work. You know, part of the inspiration for even the California Rural Partnerships Alliance work was, one, that we know there isn't always a lot of attention to rural or rural serving communities. And I mention that because some of you may have noticed when we mentioned our small learning communities that we work with, that some of them are not places you necessarily think of as rural. For example, San Luis Obispo, I mean, it's certainly not very urban, but people don't necessarily always think of it as rural because they have a number of small rural communities that are supported by their county office of ed, for example, where students are going to the college in their community college district. So there, A, was interest in focusing on rural areas and rural serving areas, and then B, there was an acknowledgement that while CCPT really strive for you know, regional collaboration and sort of a different way of work, there wasn't necessarily a ton of guidelines that were put out specifically around data use, data collection, data sharing across sectors. And so because of those, oh, I'm sorry, we're seeing the audio. I'm not sure. Hopefully this will be a little better. Can people hear?
I think that's a little better. We'll keep you monitored, Valerie. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. So anyhow, as we are attentive to rural and rural serving communities, and then attentive to the lack of sort of guidance around data use for cross-sector partnerships, that's sort of where a lot of this work has come from. So we're going to share 4 big ideas with you, and then again open it up for folks who have questions. So do you mind going to the next slide, please? So our first learning was really around sort of the shift, sort of the mind shift that was, we think, relevant to really understanding the regional cross-sector data work. And we mentioned this both in the context of CCPT, but also a number of the other regional cross-sector initiatives. I'm sorry, I'm hearing the feedback in. Anyway, what you can see on the left side of your screen is really what we call at JFF the traditional ways of work. And some of this will look familiar to those of you who may have attended one of our colleagues' presentations at, I think, the second CCPT convening in Sacramento in, I think, the fall of 2015. And so really what Renee was sharing was that, a lot of people sort of came into the work for cross-sector pathway work, really thinking about their regions as defined by geography, really thinking about relationships with, for example, one school district and one community college, or one school district and one employer partner. It really relied a lot on individual relationships, focused a lot on programmatic outputs, and really was subject to grant funding. So in cases where a person or a grant left, oftentimes people saw sort of a decrease in sort of productivity around that goal. That said, what we've seen over the past 2 or so years in this work, for those consortia that have been really making a lot more progress, is that they've really defined their regional cross-sector partnerships more by a network. And that's really about a coalition of the willing, rather than necessarily trying to be all-inclusive or forcing others to come along, really just taking people who want to be engaged. The second thing was folks who are sort of basing their work on multiple cross-sector partnerships. And so that is by having partners in K-12, in the post-secondary space, community colleges and CSUs and UCs, even privates as relevant, alongside workforce partners or industry partners, workforce development boards, what we're seeing is an ability to hold one another accountable to these regional goals that are about big ideas related to economic, educational development, educational attainment, and economic development. What we're also seeing is that those consortia that are moving forward really well also are relying more on infrastructure, right? So when people inevitably will sort of transition in and out of institutions, all of the work, all of the partnership doesn't necessarily fall apart because they've, for example, documented the nature of their relationship. They've gotten commitments from various people within their organizations who know about the work and kept them abreast of the work. Similarly, they've kept these folks, they're able in this sort of cross-sector network approach to really help people focus on systems change outcomes, right? The big regional outcomes. The example I like to give people is, while it's important to think about, 5th grade reading, that might be most relevant to K-12 partners, not that post-secondary partners and industry or workforce partners aren't interested in 5th grade reading, but they're really interested in readiness on entering the community college, for example, or readiness to show up at work on time and with the right skills to get the job done, right? And so thinking about the bigger regional sort of systems change outcomes as opposed to necessarily just enrolling students in a program. And really just sort of bumps up against this issue of equity, right? So we know that programs are oftentimes relatively limited, and although they have fabulous outcomes for a number of students, programs are not really going to get us to the place where we want to be as a state and in many of your rural and rural serving regions in terms of educational attainment and economic development if we're not really thinking about systems change. And then finally, what we've seen is folks shifting from a focus primarily on grant funding, grant initiatives, to really thinking about scale and sustainability. And so really, again, that gets to this notion of systems change outcomes. If so many places are having more than one cross-sector initiative or regional pathway initiative, what I would ask you to think about is the extent to which you have a data plan for really managing all of these different initiatives. In many ways, this is precisely some of the work we're trying to do with the CRP Alliance, is to support the rural and rural serving consortia. So far, we've been focused on CCPT. As you all know, CCPT is sunsetting, but so far, we've really been trying to focus on supporting consortia, really think about how to make sense of all of these things. And again, not because we have the final answers, but really to provide support around critical thought partnerships. So like I said, the first thing we learned was really about the shift in regional paradigm. What does this really mean to do regional cross-sector work when you've been given sort of a lot of leeway? The second learning is really around this value of cross-sector data for regional pathways. And what we know is that data can be a connector and a bridge builder to help folks facilitate relationships among the different players and institutions in your network. That data can really allow leaders and data staff to identify patterns across programs within institutions and highlight gaps and opportunities that in many ways no one organization can do by themselves if we're really talking about regional educational attainment and economic development. One of the biggest things we're seeing is, this third bullet we have up here, people understanding the shift from a culture of compliance around data to a culture of performance and compliance. And I really like the last bullet where, data can really bring rigor, realism, structure, objectivity, breadth, and depth to your regional pathway work. And can we go to the next slide, please? And so bringing it back to you'll remember 2 slides ago, we sort of had the old paradigm and the new paradigm, and that in the second learning about the value of data is really helpful, but a lot of the work we've noticed around systems change doesn't really address data specifically. And so what we did here was put sort of the new regional paradigm on the left, you'll remember from a couple of slides ago, and what we think are some implications for cross-sector data. And so the first, while this work is defined by a network of people, right, this coalition of the willing, it really does require senior leadership's commitment to regional work. What we know is that a lot of folks are doing regional work with what folks might call workarounds. They're doing what needs to get done to meet their deadlines or timelines, and that doesn't necessarily always mean senior leadership is involved and bought in. For the work that we're trying to support, we really think that this idea of, senior leadership being committed to this regional work is critical. When we talk about having multiple cross-sector partnerships, right, where you're not just one K-12 and one community college working together, or one community college and one employer, you're working in this network where you're able to then potentially hold each other more accountable. It can make the work hard. We certainly won't lie about that, but it is a way to really build from existing cross-sector partnerships and relationships. The third is really, relying on infrastructure instead of these individual relationships. Attentiveness to this idea that there's a fair bit of transition, especially in top leadership roles, and that in order to keep the systems change work going, we really need a little bit more attentiveness to the infrastructure that's being built, the relationships that are being nurtured in order to maintain the work. I won't read all of them just because I know you all can read for yourselves, but we do want to say that doing cross-sector data work does rely fundamentally on the relationships that are being built, given that we have such a disjointed data system. But these are some keys where we think you can be trying to pay more attention to what it means for the data work when you're trying to get multiple schools, multiple districts, and multiple post-secondary partners to really work together in a synergistic way to support educational attainment and economic development. Thanks. So over the past year under the CRP Alliance, we've seen our partners move through what we sort of consider 3 phases in the work related to gathering, sharing, and using cross-sector pathways data at a regional level. So the first one is really around building awareness and knowledge. And this is really helping people understand the various data systems, portals, and dashboards. Part of us bringing on CCGI today to help you understand what data you could be using to capture data related to your career pathways work. This stage is also a time where people are able to think about the goals and outcomes of a regional career pathways system and what that would mean for their local context. We have some resources for that. The second phase of work, and really sort of between the first and second phase, is really this idea of developing an implementation plan to operationalize and really try to systematize data gathering, sharing, and use efforts. This might mean identifying steps to move beyond your sort of data sharing agreements where people are ready and willing to sign on, but it really is hard to get sort of movement after that sign on. Helping people outline who will hold what roles and responsibilities related to collecting the data, gathering the data, holding the data, who will own the data, what to do about privacy, those sorts of things. During this sort of part of the work, it's a time where you can help regions really understand what the value proposition associated with the regional work is. Again, if you think back to this example I gave on like 5th grade reading, right? What are the issues outside of that that really can engage K-12, post-secondary, and community colleges, and who are the people who need to be at those levels? What I saw when folks signed on is that we have some sort of CTE folks, we have some counselors, we have some DSNs, we have some K-12 district people, right? All of these people are valuable players in your network when you're doing the regional cross-sector work. And when you think about implementation that will allow you to make database decisions, you know, it's important to think of where all of these different types of players fit in at the institution level, and then again at the regional level. When we think about planning and action, right, we're also thinking about how to help folks outline clear data sets and processes that will steer their data collaboration and use efforts at the regional level. And as folks get closer toward decision making, it's really about how are they furthering career pathways goals, right? Ensuring alignment of K-12 and community colleges with the labor market demand in their area. Really about supporting the rollout of this implementation plan. How are you facilitating relationships, being inclusive where necessary, documenting the work that you're doing, sharing it with leaders and keeping them engaged, and identifying milestones that help you know that you are not, in fact, spinning your wheels. Hopefully, you guys are getting an understanding of the CRP Alliance and sort of some of the work that we've been doing around supporting regional career pathways work. We'll say this first phase, this last year, was really around doing some coaching calls with folks in the small learning community, helping them with meeting prep and facilitation, doing some in-depth strategy sessions around how to map what they want to monitor at the regional level with the different data systems that are available, understanding the various data systems. Not everyone, you know, in K-12, for example, is familiar with Launchboard, and, you know, not everyone knows about KTMA, for example, et cetera. And really what we've also tried to do is make sure we've provided folks access to sort of calls around various topics or trainings. And we wanted to leave you all with, you know, for those of you who are serving or rural or have rural serving communities in your region, we're going to be starting the phase 2 of our work, continuing with some of the partners, and certainly are open to bringing on others who would like support around coaching and technical assistance. If you're interested, you can certainly let us know.